with the 4 degrees Celsius scenario water level superimposed over today's development. And here's the 2 degrees Celsius scenario. So 4 degrees, 2 degrees. Here's a look at Mumbai, gateway to India, in the 4 degrees scenario, in the 2 degrees scenario. Here is a look at the Opera House in Sydney, in the 4 degree scenario, or the 2 degree scenario. So with that, I'd like to thank you very much. Here are some URLs where you can find our material. The main map that we have that's live is available in Bangla via surgingseas.org and the Risk Finder. You can go to the Bangladesh Risk Finder in English at the URL riskfinder.org/Bangladesh, and within several days that will also be available in Bangla. Please feel free to contact me at bstrauss@climatecentral.org, and you can access all of the sea level materials that I showed via surgingseas.org. Now, I know the meeting is running short on time. We have a 2-minute video which could be played locally, but it's strictly optional. It gives a kind of global photorealistic tour contrasting the consequences of 4 degrees Celsius warming versus 2 degrees Celsius warming using 3D imagery in Google Earth, and it covers all of the continents, including a number of cities in Asia.
Ben, thank you very much indeed. Please hold the video just for the moment, because we might have some questions from the floor for you, and if you'd stay online, that would be appreciated. We have one
Absolutely.
question. Will that be okay if we ask questions of you while you're still with us? For someone else. Okay, we'll come back to it in just a moment. We have about 5 minutes before we conclude this session for the tea break. So perhaps we do have time for the video. Let's go for the video then, please, the 2-minute video that Ben has. Then we'll come back for some final questions, and we'll conclude before the tea break at 3:45 p.m. Wow, fantastic technology, but pretty frightening stuff. And the music to go with it too, Ben, I must say I was a bit terrified myself there too. Thank you for that, very much appreciated. We have a question, but not for you, I don't think.
If I may just add that all of the material that I've shown is online and freely available to reuse with attribution. And there are extensive videos of individual cities, 2-minute videos of many cities around Asia and the world, and freely downloadable KML layers in Google Earth so that people can create their own still imagery and videos as well.
Thank you very much, Ben. You have a very attentive audience here, and I know that people will be logging onto those sites that you've suggested to us. It's very impressive, I must say. Now, a question from the floor, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Martin, for your nice moderation. My question to Subendrini, Seed Asia. Yeah, I so very grateful to you regarding your nice presentation regarding automatic weather monitoring center. Basically, in Bangladesh, we come from the community radio sector. We are very much struggling for this equipment. So I would be very happy if you little bit brief regarding the automatic weather monitoring center and how much it would cost and which country you import for this equipment. Thank you.
Basically, what I know
if that was a question for me, I wonder, Martin, whether you could repeat it because it's hard to understand on the audio.
No, Ben, it wasn't for you. It was for a colleague here who has the student newspaper.
Apologies,
then. No, it's okay. Just stand by.
Basically, what the machinery was bought from a company in India, in Delhi, and it's a big machine, and then the data is collected into a computer, and the console shares the data with us daily. The machine is, but it was from Delhi.
Thank you. We have a question from over this side.
Yes. This is again Kazi and Adil Haq from Friendship. Actually, I congratulate Mr. Mamtaj for this wonderful innovation and I hope it will be great success. But my question to Mr. Munir Hussain from the Ministry of Commerce, I will take the privilege actually not that much connected with presentation, but regarding adaptation, whenever a question for adaptation, we don't think for mitigation, we think for adaptation. Whenever a question for adaptation, then question of some cost, some involvement, some investment. Then as you are in Ministry of Commerce, very difficult to find you beyond this room. You are in very occupied zone. So I am raising a question. Is there any chances in Bangladesh to introduce by the government bank insurance systems for the people who are vulnerable condition? And now you are heading for the budget program. So these are people, those who are in Chor, coastal belt. Is there any plan you can give VAT exemption, tax exemption to compensate somehow? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Chowdhury.
Actually, I already mentioned that we'd like to develop a resilient village. You know that CDMP has taken 800 villages that you have to identify the risks, and on the basis of risks, you have to go for action plan and go for adaptation, some adaptation measures, structural and non-structural issue. I already mentioned that this CRA process should be incorporated in the government policy guideline, in the regular phenomena, in the same revenue budget. That will give you some positive result, number one. Number two is that already we have incorporated the weather-based crop system for insurance. It is now, the study has completed and government is also bringing it under the policy guideline. And also they are looking for some other areas that which more vulnerable that should be bring under some insurance policy as also for earthquake is very difficult to assess, you know, there is some complexity. But weather-based or cyclone or some other disaster, that can be bring under the insurance system, and maybe tax exemption also is there, tax exemption on some cash incentive as well. So that is the planning of the government. But one thing I'd like to bring your kind notice is that in the 7 5-year plan is called DRF, Development Result Framework. They bring the CC and DRA under one umbrella, they're able to bring, and they develop some result-based framework, and they allocated adequate money for DRA-CC integration, which will definitely bring a positive result, I think so. Thank you.
Thank you. Look, we really are running out of time, folks, so I do apologize. We were supposed to finish at 3:45, which is right now. One quick question here, and then the gentleman over here, the final one. So 2 questions, please. Yes, keep them short if you could, please.
Okay, this is a question for Mr. Strauss. if he's still online.
Ben, are you still there?
Yes.
Question
Okay.
for you.
All right. I'm Syed Milki, and I live in Chittagong. The Chittagong that he showed me as an example. And for the last 17 years, the place I live in, I've seen it slowly go underwater. Especially between May to September, I used to see the water come like 5 miles away in 2000. Now it's in my house every rainy season. So that means the sea level is really rising. I mean, I'm a sufferer. But the politicians are not doing anything about this. And we see news reports, the media does a lot of coverage, and nobody is doing anything about it. So, I mean, if the sea level is going to rise, and with the present situations, even international politicians don't believe there is climate change happening. We are seeing that in the US right now. I mean, where do we go? I mean, I don't see any solution for us who are going underwater. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me put that to Ben. Ben, so this gentleman has seen his property going underwater, and politicians don't seem to care, and there seems to be no action.
And my wife is forcing me to buy a new house.
Okay. Comments, Ben?
So I think the question is that the person asking the question is experiencing this. He's seeing places go underwater, but he sees a lack of interest from politicians. And what can we do? Is that the question?
Yes, yes.
So I'm not sure if the politicians in question are local to Bangladesh or in the United States or both. But yes, I think this is a serious problem, and it's part of our responsibility as communicators to try and tell this story more loudly and more clearly, and to use a lot of visual material to show its impact. I also think there is a very strong justice issue here, and a lot of the times much more attention is paid by political elites when wealthier interests are affected, and when it is people who don't have a lot of money who are threatened, it doesn't reach the media in the same way, and it doesn't reach the politicians, very unfortunately. We see that in the United States, where wealthy beachfront communities may be protected when they have a low level of threat, but poorer communities on bays that are already experiencing much more flooding have no investment. So I think it's a serious problem, and it's part of our responsibility as scientists and journalists and storytellers to really highlight that because it's only going to get worse.
Indeed, thank you. Look, thank you very much. And indeed, Ben, this morning we saw a video, and one person in the video said, everything is crying underwater. And I think that's true too. Look, thank you very much for that. I think that's something we can include in the Dhaka Declaration, perhaps. That's a good one to put forward. So if you'd like to frame a bullet point or something that we might be able to get into the Dhaka Declaration. Now, really finally, gentlemen over here, if you could be short with your question, we'd appreciate it very much.
Thank you very much. I am Kaji Mohammad Fazlul Haq. I am from Urban Development Directorate. It's not question. I have few comments and supplement to Mr. Munir sir. First of all, I would like to thank Mr. Ben for his fine presentation to show the impact of sea level rise, and also to Munir sir for his lively and comprehensive presentation. First of all, I would like to say that disaster, whether it's climatic or geomorphological, it impacts on space. Any initiative we take, that must be integrated into space. Otherwise, no other initiative will be effective one. Okay, so sir, you have presented many adaptation processes, and many sectoral approaches, all should be integrated into land use planning process. If all, and you told that this should be integrated. And the land use planning process is the only way to integrate all them, to bring in within an umbrella. And sir, Urban Development Directorate already implemented a plan mainstreaming disaster risk reduction into land use planning and management with the assistance from CDMP, Comprehensive Disaster Management Program. The case study was in my mentioning. And we are now going to implement from the July 2017 at coastal region, Paira Kuakata comprehensive planning focusing on ecotourism. In that project, we are going to integrate various sectors, for an example, land use, transportation, geology, that means subsurface, hydrogeology, surface water, and also existing flora and fauna, that means ecology. This is the first initiative in Bangladesh that is going to integrate all the sectors, and that will also address the standing order and disaster management plan for Bangladesh, etc. All.
Thank you. I'll have to politely butt in. I appreciate your comments very much indeed. Perhaps you could share them with the folks you are aiming to a little bit later.
I have last sentence to say.
I'm sorry, we really are out of time. Look,
okay, thank you.
But thank you. I don't wish to be, I hope I'm not being rude. I do apologize to you personally on that. Thank you very much to the team here at the table. Thanks to Ben in the USA. And thank you to you today. Some of these points that we picked up tomorrow, for example, there's a presentation by NHK Japan, who have a very sophisticated early warning system, which you might like to hear about, maybe to adapt to local situations. Thank you for your questions. Thanks for your time. Thank you for coming. Ben, I can assure you had a full house here, and everyone enjoyed all of the presentations. So maybe a round of applause for the people on the team. And thank you to Nadim and the engineers for all their work.
Martin and your panelists, thank you very much indeed. Right, we are, as Martin says, running very late. We will break now for tea. Short break, please. 20 minutes, so we will come back here. We will start the next session at 4:15. It is now 5 to 4, so 4:15, we will start the last session. So if you could come here on time. Panelists who are taking part tomorrow morning in session 5, please could you meet Atik, who is the moderator, in the media room during this break, please. Atik will be at the media room for panelists in session 5 tomorrow morning. If you meet Atik over there, please. We will start at 4:15.
pala dahilan upang isailalim sa state of calamity ang probinsya.
So yung Project Dina, yung design
tuwing buwan ng Pebrero ay
Could the panelists for the final session take to the stage, please? Yes, okay, if you can settle down, please take your seats. We'll be ready for the final session of the day. Yes, okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming back for this final session. It's been a long day and we do appreciate your participation. This final session, as you can see, has 5 panelists, so we have a lot to go through, and the estimated original hour and a half is now down to an hour and 10 minutes. So we'll do our best to fill as much as we can of the time with useful knowledge and information. Now, my background as a broadcaster meant that I was actively involved in the difficulties of trying to communicate climate change issues. So I know that there are challenges. Thankfully, there are also solutions. Dealing with complex issues, yes, it's a tough task. A, to get a wider public involved. B, to get them to understand. And C, perhaps the most important, to get them to act on what they've heard or seen. Now, the next hour or so we'll look closer at ways and means to do that. So let's begin immediately. It's my pleasure to invite the Director General of BTV, Mr. Harun al-Rashid, to begin the session, and he'll be looking at the role of the national broadcaster here in Bangladesh. Mr. Harun.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. You know my subject of presentation, that is the role of national broadcaster in dealing with the climate change, climate variation and disaster risk reduction. Before I go for the role of national media, national broadcaster, let me say something about the Bangladesh situation. Bangladesh has appeared in the world map in 16 December 1971 as a sovereign state, and we had a armed struggle for our freedom, it's a struggle for independence. So we won the war and ultimately got the victory at the War of Liberation. Since Bangladesh achieved independence in 1971, we have many development scenario, many development achievement. Our GDP has become more than triple in real terms. Food production has increased significantly. Population growth has declined significantly in comparison to very recent years. Rate of education tremendously increased. Significant reduction of child and maternal mortality rate. Women are empowered distinctly. Over last 10 years, economic growth has accelerated and country is in the right track to become the middle income country by the year 2021. Despite the successes, still a large number of people are still live under the poverty. Why? Due to natural calamities, due to climate change, climate variation, due to frequent flood, untimed and abnormal rainfall, drought, tidal surge, salinity intrusion. These all you have discussed earlier. Our Honorable Minister in his inaugural speech, he also mentioned all these things. Let me just mention these again. Erosion in river side and Howrah area and other areas. Cyclone is a very old natural calamities. It's a continuously we are facing this cyclone. Storm. Degradation of forest land and deforestation, of course. Climate change and etc. are more visible. These are the visible climate variation and climate change and disaster vulnerability in our country. And earthquake is the grave concern of recent days, and thunder is the recent addition. People residing in the fragile parts of the country, such as river island and coastal belt, are especially vulnerable to natural disaster. They are especially vulnerable. What Bangladesh is doing to improve the environment for the present and future generation? What is our role? Bangladesh government has the constitutional obligation to the state shall endeavor to protect and improve the environment and to preserve and safeguard the natural resources, wetland and wildlife for the present and future generation. This is the state's obligation stipulated in the Article 18A of Bangladesh Constitution, and this article is incorporated in 2011. Because of the commitment and the obligation of the government, we have taken many measures in order to deal with the climate change. National Adaptation Program of Action, Bangladesh Climate Change Strategy and Action Plan we have, Bangladesh Climate Change Trust Fund we have formed, and National Adaptation Plan we have adopted, Clean Development Mechanism, CDM, Joint Credit Mechanism, intended nationally determined contribution, INDC. These are the action taken to address climate change issue. Our Honorable Prime Minister, you all know, Sheikh Hasina received the United Nations highest environmental accolade in recognition of Bangladesh's far-reaching initiatives to address climate change. We have many things we earned, many achievements, many things we had. Now, what broadcasters it is doing? In both public service broadcaster and private broadcasters in Bangladesh, including television, radio, community radio, and new media, are very active, proactively working to address the issue of climate change and minimize the disaster risk reduction due to climate change and climate variation. Let us see a glimpse of broadcasters' intervention in Bangladesh. What broadcasters are doing, what is their role. I have seen, I will be projecting some of the clips with, I will not tell anything, there will be some description on the clips. So I have not included this news coverage on climate change and disaster risk reduction issue. These are the major intervention of our national broadcasters in Bangladesh. Let us see the glimpse of the interventions. Bangladesh is the worst victim of climate change and global warming. Broadcasters communicate, inform, elaborate the real issue, and aware the people. We know. In UN, our Honorable Prime Minister expressing her firm determination to deal with the climate change issue and reduce the disaster risk. Broadcasters disseminate pre-disaster awareness and alertness.
Our first laureate, Her Excellency Sheikh Hasina, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh.
This award is a recognition of the spirit and resilience of our people in fighting climate change.
Media content on the struggle of the people and their survival, fighting against climate change and disaster.
ঘূর্ণিঝড়ের সময় যা যা করতে হবে সতর্ক সংকেত সম্পর্কে জানা না থাকলে সিপিপির স্বেচ্ছাসেবকদের নিকট থেকে জেনে নিন।
Thank you.
Again, we'll keep questions to the end. Let's move on immediately. A country that suffers more than most, perhaps, from natural disasters is the Philippines, and therefore their experience in dealing with communication issues, well, it's a steep curve, I think, that we all can learn from. Now, Donna May is president of UB Media in the Philippines and knows all too well about reaching out through media. Donna.
Thank you, Russell. Shuvo Porano. Good afternoon. Panahon TV produces weather, climate change preparedness, and relevant content in multi-platforms in the Philippines. Panahon is a Filipino word which translates to both time and weather. For everybody here, just an overview, the Philippines is a country of about more than 7,107 islands in Southeast Asia. In cooperation with the National Weather Bureau Pag-asa, Panahon TV gives daily weather broadcast to various media partners. So we are on television, radio, newsprint, website, widgets, social media, and mobile app. And here are examples of our reports.
Isa ang Angat Dam sa tatlong reservoir na matatagpuan dito sa Bulacan. Ito ang pangunahing pinag-
This is Angat Dam, and this is Metro Manila's main source of water. Farmers from Bulacan and Pampanga also get water from here. This is Amor. Batanes is now under the state of calamity. Know the weather before planning your activities. We also give local weather information throughout the Philippines, and also weather-related updates such as red tide caused by weather conditions. Also the heat index forecast. And of course, global weather phenomenon. We also give air pollution index throughout the country. We are very privileged because Panahon TV is housed inside the National Weather Bureau in the Philippines. This is a unique arrangement. We are a private company in the National Weather Bureau network. That means we have access to weather information as soon as it happens, and we get to interact with the scientists, with the forecasters in the Philippines. So that's our studio in the Philippines. And since we are communicators, we're basically, our background is mass communication, we create these creative information. They're called infographics. So that's an example of what to do if caught indoors. We are just taking off from the national campaign mandated by the National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Council. So basically, during an earthquake, this is the mandate, which is to duck, cover, and hold. Very, very simple, creative artwork that we share across platforms. And also, we do advocacy projects engaging the youth through our campus tour called Bisita Escuela, which in Filipino means, which in English means visit school. Wherein we invite our national experts to reach out to college students. So our reporters also do, aside from the TV work, they do this advocacy work live and reach the schools. This is our FIVOX Secretary, Director Renato Soledum, also taking time. And this is the head of our Weather and Flood Forecasting Division, Dr. Kayanan, also visiting schools. So we see a very, very active studentry and youth in the Philippines where they really ask a lot of questions about DRR and preparedness.
Meron pa tayong oxygen na natitira sa lungs when we collapse. And that's enough na kailangan lang natin i-circulate yung blood. So, answer to the CPR lang. I am mouth yan. Just do chest compression.
Aside from college students, we also reach out to very, very young audience. We get invited to kindergartens. So our reporter, aside from television, does advocacy work to college students as well as children as young as 6 years old. That's Amor right there talking about the greenhouse gases effect to 6-year-old children. And we have been doing a continuous internship program in our studio where we invite students from various universities. And these are students from mass communication, not only mass communication, but also computer engineering, astronomy, various fields. And they learn about media production and meteorology, about 300 hours. And they also get to do live production work and on-cam work. So that's Jero Castro. He is a student in the Philippines, and he got to go on cam. So here are some footages about that. People prepare for Valentine's Day during February. Thunderstorms may cause flash floods and landslides. In Davao, Caraga, and Soxargen. So she's a student from the University of the Philippines. So they get to write, shoot, and produce their stories as well. So more than 100 people have gone through Panahon TV's internship program. And we were also tasked by the National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Council in 2013 to produce their videos about national hazards in the Philippines. So here's one of them. This was basically shared nationally in communities and public schools and was also available online and is still available online for download. When you're caught indoors during an earthquake, do not do the duck, cover, and hold technique under a sturdy table.
Maaari rin magkaroon ng tsunami kung may landslide sa ilalim ng dagat, kung pumutok ang bulkang malapit sa dagat o sa ilalim nito, at kung may bumagsak na bulalakaw sa karagatan.
Storm surges transpire due to the tropical storms or typhoons.
Dahil sa hangin at mababang atmospheric pressure na dulot ng tropical storm o typhoon.
And of course, we are on social media. This is us today, and we posted that on Facebook. And we get a lot of correspondents also sharing photos to our social media. This was an earthquake that happened on April 8th in Batangas. And we also get our producers. We're rolling out stories that are shot, produced, edited on the iPhone. And here's an example of that also. That's shot on an iPhone. So our students also get to produce these stories on these mobile gadgets. And they also share that on our Facebook Live. So one of our advocacy projects also, this is my last slide, we have a plant and nurture activity in the perimeter of Mount Makiling in the Philippines. We've been adopting these trees for the past 3 years, so that's how much they've grown, and that's me with the team. So thank you so much for listening, Donobad.
And just as a follow-up for your information, the 2017 Asia-Pacific International Summit and Training is happening in Quezon City in the Philippines in July. So there's a 3-day summit and training workshops happening there. And of course, I'm sure that the organisers would be more than happy if organisations from Bangladesh and anywhere throughout Asia would wish to partake. It's called Media Landscape in the Changing Climate. And that again is supported by the ABU. It's an old cliche, but it's so true. If a message is not clear and understood, it's no good. Therefore, again, by logic, the designing and conveying of the message is paramount for all of those involved. Dr. Salimul Haq is Director for the International Centre for Climate Change and Development.
Thank you very much, Russell. Good afternoon and Assalamu alaikum. As you heard, my name is Salimul Haq. I'm Director of the International Center for Climate Change and Development at the Independent University in Bangladesh. I don't have a PowerPoint or any nice videos to show, so I'm just going to talk. What I do is I tell stories. So I'm going to tell you the story of what's happened in Bangladesh over the last decade or so in the field of climate change. And it's actually a journey from challenge to solution. Bangladesh, I would say, and I travel around the world, I work a lot internationally, is the most climate change aware country in the world. More people in Bangladesh are aware of this, and the BBC surveys across Asia have demonstrated this as well, that the level of awareness of the challenge of climate change is very, very high in this country. What we now need to do is to transition from awareness of the problem or the challenge to knowledge of the solutions, which is not the same thing. We need to be able to know what to do about the problem, not just know what the problem is. And we are partly on that journey of moving from awareness to knowledge, from challenge to solution. And I'm going to pick 3 examples of things that we now need to think about, lessons, if you like, that have come out of the work that's happened over the last 10 years or so. And the first one is to do with the science, with the message. Climate change is a scientific issue. It comes from us, the scientists. We study it, we come out with papers, academic papers, but in order for us to convey the message to the public at large, we need to simplify the message and use communicators like yourselves, and we need to collaborate to do that. And the principle there is for us to simplify the message, but not oversimplify the message. And I would say in Bangladesh, the pendulum has somewhat swung in the oversimplification direction, because now the level of awareness of climate change is such that if it rains, we think it's climate change. If it's hot, we think it's climate change. Not everything is climate change. In fact, I write a regular column in the Daily Star newspaper. Some of you might be aware of it. It comes out every Wednesday. Today was an issue. Last week's issue, I wrote an article on whether the floods we are seeing in the northeast in the Howrah Basin in Bangladesh is attributable to human-induced climate change or not. And I try to explain how you attribute climate change. You can attribute higher degrees of temperature rise easily. You can attribute sea level rise and snow melt easily, but you can't attribute floods so easily. There is an attribution, but it's more complicated, and we have to understand that. So our level of understanding has to improve, has to increase. Simple messages, oversimple messages will no longer do. So there's a responsibility for all of us to enhance our knowledge of the problem and be able to make the message more accurate as possible. The other element of the messaging that I would suggest that we be aware of, which is not every disaster is a climate change related disaster, particularly earthquake. Earthquake is not climate change related. Okay? It is a phenomenon, it's a geological phenomenon, it has different causes. Climate change are floods, cyclones, hurricanes, droughts, etc., anything related to either temperature or hydrology. The second message, if you like, or lesson of the message is that when we communicate to people, what we need to be aware of is simply communicating the problem. Bangladesh is very vulnerable, is not particularly useful unless we also say, but there's something we can do about it, and this is what we can do about it. So a problem without an associated solution to the problem is not a particularly useful solution. If you go to a village and there's a very vulnerable community and you tell them, you're now going to become even more vulnerable because of this climate change problem, but there's nothing much we can do about it, is not particularly helpful to them. So you need to be able to tell them about the problem, but also help them come up with solutions or give them solutions. Preferably help them come up with solutions rather than impose solutions on them. But this is something that we all need to be aware of, and we need to be putting it into our practice in terms of the messaging that we want to provide to people in general. And the third most important lesson I would say right now, given the level of prior awareness and understanding, is moving to the next level. It is not static. The message of climate change is not static. It's not a one-time fits-all message. It's a continuously evolving message, and it's one in which solutions, moving from challenges to solutions, are things that we learn by doing. We do something, it works, it doesn't work, we figure out what works and what we need to do more of, we figure out what doesn't work and what we don't need to do anymore, and we go to the next level. So the second level of doing is very different from the first level of doing, and that intervention in between the two is a learning exercise. We have to learn from doing something and then do the next round of things differently, better than what we did before. And this is a continuous cycle of learning by doing. So it's not static. The single solution we started with is never going to be the same solution that we are going to continue to do over time. And so what we need to be thinking about is how are we going to build on, learn from what we're doing. And in that, let me conclude by offering on behalf of the scientific community in Bangladesh, of which there's quite a sizable scientific community. We are quite well organized under an umbrella called Goveshona. We have an annual conference, we have monthly meetings. Every January we have a conference. We'd be very happy to collaborate with any of you who are interested. Last January when we had our conference, we actually had a day on communications, which we did together with a BBC Media Action as well as with a Bangladeshi English language newspaper, the Climate Dhaka Tribune. We'd be very happy to collaborate with any other communicators who might be interested in. And this continuous dialogue of the scientific community who are doing research, gathering more information and knowledge, and providing it to the communications community to be able to then communicate to the wider public of the solutions to the problem. Everybody's aware of the problem. We now need to make everybody aware of the solution. And the problem, and the aspect of the solution is this, the solutions are not the same for everybody. It depends where you are, who you are, what you do, as to what your role in the solution will be. So the problem is common for all of us, but the solutions are different from different people. Broadcasters have different roles to play. Academics and researchers like I have different roles to play. Government has a different role to play. NGOs have a different role to play. And we need to give them solutions that they can then take forward in their own way to enable the country to be more adapted to the impacts of climate change. And that's the goal, for Bangladesh to be not the most vulnerable country to the impacts of climate change, but the most adapted country to the impacts of climate change. Thank you very much.
Yes, very good indeed. I am now going to ask you a very delicate question. I'd like to see, with a show of hands, how many of you have actually been on this planet for a quarter of a century? That is, how many of you will not see your 25th birthday again? I'm going to admit, I'm more than 26. So how many of you, please, have been on this planet for a quarter of a century or more? Please, sir, come on, you must admit. Madam, yes, thank you. Sorry, I wasn't being indelicate. Right, yes, indeed. So what does that go to prove? It proves, I think, that one of the major problems that we face in communicating and dealing with climate change is engaging a younger generation. We therefore, logically, need a new generation of communicators. People who don't have grey hair, for example. Professor Rahman, please, come and tell us, how do we train the new generation?
Thank you. I was in fact amazed to listening to Professor Salimul Haq, who has been writing extensively on climate change in the media, not only as an expert, but also as op-ed writer, and we are very enlightened to reading his contributions in the mainstream media in our country. Anyway, so I'm a bit trying to give you the overview of how the traditional media, I mean the traditional communicators, if you want to use that word, are dealing with climate change, and based on that we may find out something how we can engage our younger generation as new generation of communicators in climate change field. So the first one, as we have been listening to different lectures since morning, and especially a couple of lectures in this session, we got the understanding that there is a gap between the common people and the scientific issues, and therefore enhancing public understanding about the climate change, that is really important. As Professor Salimul Haq rightly said, that the awareness has been built, but to me that awareness especially is among the, the very aware people, like educated people, urban people. But on the other hand, the people living in different places in the country, especially in the rural areas, who are the most victim or sufferer of the climate change, are they familiar? Are they aware of these issues that these are being caused by the climate change? I'm not sure. Maybe they are the expert people. They can tell us about that. So for that, I should say that media should work, to give people much more popular understanding of the hard issues that being caused by the climate change and the causes and the negative consequences that have been discussed extensively in different avenues and here as well today. So then it relates to science literacy and also the climate change literacy and how to develop that. And especially if you go to the print media, that I have been doing a couple of studies relating to print media, and we have found that especially the English newspapers are contributing to climate change a bit more than the Bengali newspapers. On the other hand, if you see, there are many more readers for Bengali newspapers, not for English newspapers. So it means that the people who are, who belong to the upper class and understand English language, they become familiar reading those articles, but not the common people in general. So that's one thing. The other thing is how to explain this hard science to the ordinary people. So that is also a very important point, because that needs to be explained with all the complexities and the variations, because the climate change, which might be, to me, as I am social scientist, Professor Salimul Haq has worked with the IPCC as an expert, so they come up with the findings that is almost certain. But is there any other science, having a different kind of opinion on the climate change and its consequences? So when the stories are being, written, then the writers should address all the complexities and the variations. And we also have traditional beliefs about climate change. Not only climate change, to different negative consequences happening in our country due to the illiteracy maybe, and due to the traditional belief people have been holding on. And therefore people in most cases think of, it's given by God, it's our fate, and we don't have any way to escape from that. So as communicators, I think especially the new generations, because new generations, they need to debunk those traditional beliefs people are having about the climate change. And that needs to be done by identifying the deficiencies in public opinion. Because do we have, I'm not sure, do we have any survey that what sort of deficiencies we have among the different people coming from a different strata of society? So those need to be identified. Then maybe the media can play a great role there to fill the gap. So relating scientific perspective to people's livelihood, that is also very important because the livelihood thing that have been caused by climate change, but they are not being supported with the proper evidence what is happening on the ground. I mean, those relations between the occurrence and impacts on the ground, and also the reports being written by journalists, there should be connection, and that connection should be made by the new generation of communicators. As we have become familiar with that, climate change has many aspects and dimensions. Professor Salimul Haq was giving a lecture at some other places, and he came up with the thing that there are different issues, and we also know that the compensation, adaptation, technology transfer, different issues we have been talking about. But do the reporters, do the media deal with all aspects of climate change? Especially if we think of our newspapers, they deal with, kind of compensation and kind of the negative consequences. But as he rightly said, that there are very few articles and media stories about climate solutions. So those are the things also need to be taken into account. We especially blame the Western nations. We blame, some other stakeholders, that they are the responsible, as if we don't have anything to do. But as a human individual, as a citizen, don't we have any responsibility to protect our mother planet? Don't we have any other, way of helping, to bring solutions to those problems? Those needs to be taken into account. As I said, that the traditional media, not only the newspaper, if you think of television, which is considered as sort of entertainment medium. I was looking at the content of television during the COPs, and especially televisions are covering those issues based on the, what happens at the COPs. I mean, the Conference of Parties, the big event. But in other time, they rarely have reports. If they have, yes, they have. When we have a disaster, when we have something, the river erosion, people are losing lands and landslides, they report. But the problem is they don't connect it. If they connect, sometimes they do a mistake. As it's been said, that all the problems, the negative consequences, several disasters which are being taken place in Bangladesh, not all are due to the climate change, but some are due to climate change, but the connection are missing in different reports, especially in television as well. They are being told, but occasionally. But as we see, that climate change is so diverse problem, and it cross-cuts, it connects to all the development aspects of the country, as it has been shown in our policy papers. So media can deal with climate change from different angles. And therefore, I think personalization of consequences, this is important for the message producer, not only in television, in all the medias. I mean, personalization, that means having proper evidence from the grassroots people. As I said in the morning, that coffee production in Uganda is a case of livelihood. On the other hand, coffee production, drinking in the UK is a matter of lifestyle. But if it is not properly referenced, said, then most of the readers may not be able to relate it with the livelihood problems in Uganda. And in Bangladesh, in the context of Bangladesh, I think the domestication issue is a very important issue, because as we have heard of climate change is a global phenomena, yes, obviously that is the global phenomena, but not necessarily having same consequences in every corner of the world. In Bangladesh, we do have specific kind of problems. We have all the problems some other people are facing in some other part of the world. And therefore, the problems and the media messages, those need to be interconnected and need to be domesticated, realizing and depending on the reality in the country. And what we observed while doing research on print media and also the television content, that most of the stories are event-centered. They don't deal with the process. They don't deal with, the other aspects like how women are being affected and how health hazards are being caused and how some other negative things are being caused by climate change. There are many other issues can be brought up if the journalist, if the message producers can take an angle of development journalist or take an angle of advocacy journalist. But there is the argument that do the journalists, should the journalists do advocacy through their media? There has been debate, but on the basis of greater benefit of the society and to ensure the, the justice for the people and fill the gap and disparity between the richer nation and the poor nation in the context of climate change, I think advocacy can be done, and that advocacy is based on the right cause. And in that case, media may employ their resources to do sort of advocacy, as our Filipino panelists said that they have been doing advocacy in different fronts. I'm sure in our country, NGOs and non-governmental organizations have been doing that through different initiatives, but if we talk about the media, and media is missing that. And we also have different programs who involves younger generation for advocacy and procession and campaigning and different issues, but in the media that is missing too. And as we know that the media situation is changing. So if you go back 90s or 2000, we have a different kind of media environment, and nowadays we have our media environment is mostly driven and shaped by the technology. So we are not only depending on only newspaper, television, we do have social media, online, and other platforms for communication. And especially the younger generations are mostly engaged in new communication environment. So we do need to train the traditional media message producer so that they can use social media or maybe online media for disseminating the messages to the younger generations. And this blending is very important, and therefore we at the Department of Mass Communication Journalism realized the importance of the multimedia journalism, because now there's a story need to be told not only by writing an article or providing some footage. Stories need to be put online, having a sort of footage and written stories, and also some infographics, as our Filipino panelists said that. But this use of infographics is missing. It doesn't exist in Bangladesh. I think it's a very new phenomenon. I have not seen any message producer, especially with respect to climate change, is using infographics, which may give clearer messages to the people about the consequences and the relevant issues of climate change. And the problem is our traditional communicators are rarely using research-based journalism approach. Most of the reports are just going to someone, expert, and quoting them, but they don't go beyond that. Some of them go, some of you go, but it's not enough. I think this research-based investigative journalism is also another important thing that need to be addressed, because here you can divide the problem into sub-problems, and sub-problems you may see the causal relations of different cause and effect thing, and it's not only enough to answer who, what, when, and where, but much more importantly, you have to answer why and how things are happening. So if those can be done in the stories, that would be a great help. I think I have a couple of points more. Journalists also have challenges, Those challenges are really, do they have access to the available resources for writing stories. That's very important thing. And do they also have proper training to translate the hardcore science, interviewing Salim al-Haq or maybe other experts and translating those things in a proper way through the media to the common people? And there is there is not easy communication between the scientists and the message producers. That's also a problem. So therefore, we suggest that if the media have a dedicated person, or if the media have a bit on climate change, or maybe the relevant issues like environment and others, and then it may trigger much more coverage of the climate change and other related issues. And therefore, utilizing the strength of the new media, as I said, that may create a new generation of communicators, and that can be done through uploading the stories, on different platforms, such as the story is written for a newspaper, but it can be uploaded online, and it could be shared by Facebook, it could be shared by Twitter and other sources. And therefore, we also, I think the younger generation of communicators need sharing of knowledge between the people from different parts of the world. This co-learning and co-production of media stories may create a sort of new environment in climate change field, and that could help. So close relationship between scientists and the journalistic field is very important, I should say. And prioritizing climate change journalism at the university and media industry is another important thing. But creativity in exploring story ideas and editorial backing from the industry perspective is really important if we really want to say our stories through transmedia storytelling process. And if you really want to connect the dots those are taken place in different places, and we need to make a bridge and to give a comprehensive understanding what is being happening in the climate, and to give that sense to the common people in general. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Rahman. If I could add one more point to that, what we also teach journalists is that they have to stick to deadlines and time restrictions as well. Thank you. Right, we'll move on to our last contributor, and we hear a lot about interactivity, we hear a lot about inclusivity, the buzzwords in the media. Our final contributor is Shihad Zubairi, Senior Producer, BBC Media in Action in Bangladesh, and they've been utilizing an innovative open source in communication. But let Shihad explain more.
I'll try to stick to the time limit, and obviously I'm the last speaker probably of the day, so energy level is pretty down. So let's take this conversation in a different route. So far what we've been talking about is basically climate change and how to communicate it better. But along with climate change, naturally what happens is basically natural hazards. So what we are going to talk about, what I'm going to talk about, is basically what happens when a disaster strikes. So this presentation is not about how to communicate better about climate change issues or science behind it. It's basically if a drought happens, if a cyclone hits, if a flood occurs, what happens? So let's take a look. So the point is that why do you need to communicate? Why do we need to communicate in the time of crisis? In general, what we see is that right after a natural hazard has taken place, the usual coverage in media is about the disaster, the scale of disaster, how many people have died, the death toll, the property loss, and all of that. The question is that really helpful for the community which is affected by that flood? Does that really help anybody? So imagine we are in this conference room right now and something happens. Let's say an earthquake has just hit. What is the first reaction we are going to have? We are going to actually, I think, most of us would think about our personal safety. Second of all, as soon as we make sure that we are safe, we are going to think about our families. These are the first two instinctive reactions we are going to have. But give it an hour, give it 2 hours, what is the next stream of questions that you're going to face? If it's a major disaster, we are going to ask, where am I going to find food? Where is shelter? Where do I get medical service? Who's carrying out sort of medical relief or food distribution? Where is that's happening? And that's where we need to communicate, because otherwise it creates a lot of issues. Let's have a look at what issues it can create? So what it can create is basically a lot of confusion, isolation, and it can also create a lot of rumors. Every time there is a natural disaster in Bangladesh, whether it's cyclone, whether it's flood, there are a lot of rumors that spreads around. Is that, number one, is the cause, number two, talks about the food distribution channel not working properly, or people finding out information that food is being given out one place, they're showing up, but that's not happening. So if we communicate effectively, what can we achieve? It's listed there, but I'm just going to focus on few. Saving lives, it sounds very drastic and big and huge impact. Saving lives is actually can be quite simple. Let's say right after a disaster, if you're communicating about how to purify water, that can save lives. If you're communicating where to find medical aid, that can save lives. If there are injured people, if people don't know where to take them for medical attention, they are probably going to die at some point. So the list goes on. And apart from that, the other role that media, especially local media, can play is basically in providing psychosocial support. People are going to feel isolated. I don't know what is happening around me. If my regular network of information has been shattered, if I can't communicate with others through mobile phone, or I don't have, newspaper doesn't arrive, or the regular news bulletin is not coming out, I don't know what on earth is going on around me. I probably know about 10 miles radius, but out of that, I don't know what's going on. So I don't know if this was the first state of earthquake, if there is another one coming up. So that's why those informations are important. Oh, sorry, I think I've just, there you go. So the difference that we are trying to talk about is basically not communicating about the affected community, actually communicating to the affected community. I've just listed out all the examples of what we mean by that. And in our, jargon, in BBC Media Action jargon, we call it lifeline programming. We call it lifeline, it's quite obvious because it's basically life-saving information. But there are a few, key points, what makes those information life-saving or what makes a lifeline programming. So few things is, it's basically needs-based. It's not actually talking about the death toll unless and until people are interested to know about death toll. It's clear, it's consistent, most importantly, it's actionable. Telling me that actually a cyclone is on its way is not really helpful for me if I'm in the path of the cyclone. Telling me the cyclone signal 4 is up there and I need to do this, that is actionable information. We do it very well when it comes to cyclone preparedness. We do it very well in Bangladesh. But apart from cyclone, on other things, we actually don't. It's two-way communication, so the moment the program goes out, we also have to actively look out for response, that what people are, how they are responding, and answering their queries, engaging local, multi-platform, the list goes on. Again, sorry. It sounds very easy, probably, actually it doesn't, but there are quite a few challenges involved in this. Number one is basically for content producers, journalists, media people, our brains are wired to sort of communicate globally or nationally. We don't really think about communicating with a particular community. That's not in our habit. And the other challenge is, unless and until you have a network set up, after a disaster, it can take quite a few days to start that relationship, to build up the relationship with humanitarian actors or NGOs or government to find those information and then be able to communicate with the local community. The other problem is, we love jargons. Especially in Bangladesh, we love jargons, whether it's NGO, whether it's INGO, whether it's media, everything, the moment there is a complicated topic, we fill it with jargons that makes no sense to ordinary human being. It's even more difficult when it comes to communicating with a particular community. Otherwise, that's lost. So to help with that whole process of communicating, we have developed a certain set of tools that we like to call basically lifeline manuals, if you say. And predominantly, we're trying to target two major groups. One is program makers or content makers or journalists. The other is humanitarian actors. For program makers, we have a production manual that basically lists out the necessary steps that they need to think about to create those programs. It also brings in the points of what the community might go through at that point, or what sort of information they might need. This comes from our experience with dealing with multiple variety hazards across Asia and Africa. So we have tried to compile all of that in one. Just an example, like after the Nepal earthquake, last one, we were able to be on air within 9 hours since the first earthquake hit. That is massive. That is good turnaround time. People who were trained, not BBC Me Action, not BBC sort of bureau journalists, local media who were trained, they were actually able to go on air within half an hour with specific information is that this was the first aid. Maybe there is another one coming, aftershock might come, you need to prepare this. And within a week, we are doing comprehensive programming in terms of solution-focused problems. Is that where are you going to, how are you going to rebuild your house? What is the best possible way? Where are you going to find food, shelter? So that's for broadcasters. There are multiple topics, multiple different options that you can go through. It's not simple, but it's effective and it's important. The other thing that we have tried to do is basically create a tool for humanitarian actors. Because right after disaster, if these two parties don't work together, that's a problem. Because media, I mean, we don't do, food relief. We don't go out physically to people to help them build their house. That's not our job. Our job is to provide that information, that where that action is taking place. But if the humanitarian actors and media are not talking to each other, we can't really communicate properly. So that's why there is a separate tool that's for humanitarian actors. And all of that is free. You can download it. I would encourage you to actually give it a try. The website link is up there, www.bbcmediaactionireland.com. I'm not trying to sell a product, but it's important. And from my personal experience, having made shows for 10 years on radio and television, I can tell you the first time that I personally went through this course, it was sort of rewiring your brain, thinking about disaster situation. And it takes a bit of time, but if we don't act, if we don't get together and do this, I think, things can get worse, especially given today we are talking about whether it's not climate change, but earthquake, the concern is growing rapidly in this country, especially for a city like Dhaka. If we don't think about lifeline programming, what happens if a mega earthquake hits this city, I think things can be quite tricky. Thank you very much.
For me, I must admit that is the message of the day. We're not just there as observers. We're an active part of the solution. And I think from personal experience, when we, as ABU, went to Tacloban after Haiyan, we saw the disconnect between the various media organizations, all doing their own jobs, but not actually getting it together to work as one entity. And therefore, the solution was not as apparent as it should have been. So what an excellent tool that we can all utilize, and I'm sure that those of us involved in the practical end will do so. Right, we have 10 minutes left, and I'm sure that there are plenty and plenty of questions. So if we can get the microphones down this end first of all. Some people have been trying to get my eye for quite a while, so if we can get the microphones please down here for the questions, for the first questions. Microphones please. Hello, thank you, there we go. Rapid response, you see, not quite at the end of the day, but there we are, we're doing our best. Yes, can we come down here please? Okay, let's go to that gentleman there. I have you in mind here. Yep, it's like a lottery, isn't it? There we go, off you go.
Hello, this is Sharif. I am working with ActionAid Bangladesh as a communication expert. I think digital communication is a very important thing to do, as it is not purely addressed in disaster, when disaster occurs. Just to share an example, last couple of weeks ago, I went to address the issues of a Haur crisis. What I saw is that the ministry media just go to the Sunamganj main city and took live, but they did not go to the vulnerable area like Tahirpur, Bishambarpur. So I when the very vulnerable area, but the network in terms of mobile network is very poor. I produced a lot of content for the ActionAid Bangladesh, which hit it a lot from the community level. But due to lack of mobile network, mobile penetration in Bangladesh is rising. But in terms of its coverage, the 3G network is totally absent in the very vulnerable area. That's why the infrastructure development in terms of digital issues that should be addressed. Because when the disaster like flood occurs in the different parts, the newsman or the content producer can go to cities, but they don't go to the very vulnerable area. They can produce content, but they can send to the main office. If they can send, the quality of content is not up to the level. That's why I request all of you to advocate government or whatever you are working on the issues to develop the infrastructure so that the digital platforms can be developed and the content can run rapidly. The BBC Action Media has rightly pointed out, if we can produce a good content and if we can accelerate the content in the right time, in a right way, rapidly, that can make more sense, that can save more lives. So I request all of you to advocate not only for the digital communications, but also how we can develop the channels in terms of network and the technologies so that we can produce content rapidly and accelerate in and put in our channels and save the life. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there a comment that any of the panelists would like to make in response to that? No? No? Fine. So thank you for that comment. Could we bring the microphone across here, please?
Thank you. I am Shahidur Rahman. I am working for Radio Today 89.6 FM. First of all, I thank Shihan Jubeiri for his very energized speech. Thank you. But my question goes to Professor Salimul Haq. Sir, the issue of climate change and global warming have become a matter of grave concern for the entire human being. But my question is, what are the root causes of global warming and climate disaster? Who are actually responsible for that? And what is the ultimate solution of this phenomenon? Can you stop it? If yes, how?
Okay,
Please.
in those 6 questions that you managed to get into one there, we'll ask the Professor to answer in 2 minutes, if he may. Professor,
Please.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you very much. So there are 2 elements to this. Firstly, there are natural climatic events like floods, cyclones, hurricanes, and droughts, which occur naturally. They have always occurred. What has happened in the last 100+ years since the Industrial Revolution is that we have spewed greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, which is causing global warming. The global temperature is rising, and that is affecting both the frequency and the magnitude of these kinds of events. And so, what used to be a natural event is now becoming a human-influenced event. How much human attribution is very difficult to make at the moment, but we can say that they're going to get worse. So floods are going to get more intense and more frequent, cyclones, etc., the same. At the global level, we need to reduce our emissions of greenhouse gases, and we have a treaty that requires that. It's called the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Under that treaty, we have an agreement called the Paris Agreement, which was agreed 2 years ago in Paris. In fact, right now in Bonn, in Germany, countries are meeting to decide how to implement that agreement. Under the Paris Agreement, we have agreed to keep temperatures below 2 degrees globally, and if we can possibly bring them down to even 1.5 degrees, that will still cause some impact, but much less impact than where we are headed at the moment, which is well over 3 degrees. So that's what we need to do to reduce the potential hazardous or adverse impacts of climate change becoming much worse than they otherwise would be.
Thank you for that succinct answer. We have a question at the back, and then I'd like to bring the microphone down here.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. This is Zakir Albin from New Zealand, Malaysia, and we're working for New York Times too. So my question is, Mr. Mofizur Rahman, Department Head of Mass Communication and Journalism. Did you go through any sort of sponsorship for the research in the last 5 years? What you mentioned, more research-based informations and the media news covering are required. Did you department sponsor any sort of research-based groups like from university students or university media person, those are in the first year, second year, or third year. In your experience, did you go through, or did you, tailor-made, or did you prepare this kind of sponsor-based research programs? Number one. Number two question for Shihan Zubairi from the BBC, who said that more effectiveness required. But how about the BBC's role for the people? Can they have any kiosk or any center where they can tune up BBC, where they can have a BBC access to the BBC informations in the local area, urban areas? Thank you and good day.
Okay, another one. 2 questions for one, but let's start with the professor. Could we have the microphone down here, please?
So, no, at the department we don't sponsor any students or we don't get funding from other sources. But I personally myself is involved with a network which is called Media Climate Network. We have social scientists, especially media experts in that network from 22 countries, and we have published 3 books out of that network. The last book just came out from Belgrade, and that deals with IPCC knowledge and media in 22 countries. Thank you.
The communication tool we're talking about, the Lifeline programming, is not for BBC. It's for everybody else. The whole idea is that there's a set of guidelines that if you follow that, the programming will get much more effective, and that allows other broadcasters, especially localized broadcasters like community radio stations who speak the same dialect, who speak the same language, to be able to provide effective information. So it's not a centralized perspective, and it's not about people tuning into BBC. That's not the idea. The idea is localized content for localized people, understanding their needs, and having a communication with humanitarian actors after disasters so that they provide useful, actionable information.
Thank you. Excellent.
Hello, everyone. My name is Don Tartaglione from the Asian Disaster Preparedness Center in Bangkok, Thailand. I would like to ask the panel, as a member of the development community, how we can better work with journalists, with media organizations, because what we do is try to promote sustainable development throughout Asia, while you are the informers trying to keep people safe in the face of climate change and natural disasters. So what information do we need, do you need from us, and how can we better work together to promote sustainable development? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Who'd like to take that first? Yes?
So let me make a distinction between weather and climate, and between climatic events and climate change. Right? So the issue of human-induced climate change, which is what we are describing when we use the term climate change, is a long-term impact that is going to change weather patterns over time. So dealing with and preparing ourselves for this future of a changed climate is not the same thing as disaster preparedness. Disaster preparedness is part and parcel of it, but it goes beyond disaster preparedness, and it has a long-term dimension which speaks to generational change. Younger people need to be better prepared for dealing with this future climate, which is going to be very different from present climate. So it goes well beyond what we would traditionally call disaster risk reduction or disaster preparedness. For the kinds of disasters that I mentioned, we have known for many, many years, thousands of years in fact. The future is not going to be the same as the past. We need to prepare for the future. So preparing for human-induced climate change over the next decades is a decadal scale investment in knowledge that we have to impart, and we have to be able to communicate to the next generation of younger people, not just disaster preparedness for right now. How do you deal with the flood, or how do you deal with a hurricane?
Thank you very much. My name is Dr. Mojasimuddin. I'm from Dhaka University Botany Department. I'm working basically on plant diversity and ethnomedicine and primary health care. As I know from the panel expert, the science is basic thing for the mitigation of disaster or anything like that. So I think it's a multidisciplinary approach to reduce any kinds of hazard. So I have a question to my BTV Director General. So do you have any plan to integrate scientific knowledge with media through your media for the nation? Do you have any future planned? Thank you very much.
Hello. We don't have plan only, we are doing it. If you have any further developed plan and implementation plan, please come up with the proposal. We are ready to accept your proposal for further developing our program and getting new program in new dimension.
Yes, I'm Dewan Shiraj, working on Bangladesh Television as a youth development program presenter. My question is, Mr. Professor Mofizur Rahman, what is the significant smart tools or digital smart tools are you recommended for the climate change and risk reduction information?
What do you mean by code? I don't understand really.
What is the significant tools or smart tools or digital tools are you recommended for the next generation risk reduction information?
I remember that when we were trying to see the networks of different institutions, who have been involved with climate change knowledge protection, at that time we used issue crawler, and using the issue crawler online, we got to know who are the stakeholders in the network and producing knowledges. So maybe if your institution use issue crawler using that may give you the idea who are producing knowledge, and that knowledge you can use for your own purpose.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm afraid that we have passed our deadline. We've put in more questions than we should have. But let me explain one thing, please. Because there are so many questions that people want to ask, we're so glad that you are so engaged in these topics, please could you write them down and take them to the Secretariat at the back, to Natalia Ilieva. And what we will do in the very last session tomorrow is we will try and collate the most popular of those questions and allow you to ask them to the panelists. So we will invite certain panelists to come back and answer your questions then. We understand your frustrations that you haven't been answered, that these questions haven't been answered today. So if you write them down, you're desperate to get them answered, we will try our best to get them in the last session tomorrow. But that basically is the end of this session today. I would genuinely like to thank all the panelists who have offered a lot of information and knowledge to us. Thank you very, very much indeed. There is one other announcement that I'd like to make, and that is regarding this evening. We have the ABU award ceremony tonight on climate change and disaster risk reduction. That's the gala night. It's at the Bangabandhuna International Convention Centre. Now, participants who want to avail themselves of the common transport around here are requested to assemble at the lobby by 6:10. So you have a half an hour. The buses will start for the BICC at 6:15. All the foreign participants are requested to take the official transport only, which will be laid on again for you at 6:15. It starts at 7 o'clock. You have 1.5 hour. Very, very briefly, thank you enormously for taking part today. We have another full day tomorrow, which begins at 9 o'clock sharp in the morning, and we'll try to listen to all your questions and requests as and when they come to light. Thank you very, very much for today, and please enjoy the rest of your evening. Can I thank you very much?
দুইটা নিয়ে গেল আপনাকে